"Get out of first class." The words exploded across the cabin, followed by something no one expected: a flight attendant's hand striking a calm, dignified black woman across the face. But what if the woman in seat 2A wasn't just any passenger? What if she was the hidden owner of the very plane she sat on that night? On Aurelia Airways, Flight 719 from Miami to San Francisco, passengers witnessed more than a slap. They saw arrogance collide with quiet strength. They saw silence break into voices of truth. And they saw a woman, Dr. Serafina Vale, carry herself with a composure that concealed a power no one could imagine. Who was this woman? Why did she remain silent when humiliated, only to rise stronger when the world leaned in? And how could one act of injustice unravel into a storm that would shake an entire airline, perhaps even an entire industry? Stay with us as we unfold the journey of Flight 719, a story of dignity, accountability, and the moment one woman's truth changed everything. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter straight to you. The cabin lights hummed softly, a low mechanical chorus blending with the muted conversations of first-class passengers. Trays clinked, glasses chimed, overhead bins clicked shut. It was the sort of calm that usually defined a long-haul evening flight. But calm is fragile, and sometimes it shatters in an instant. Serafina Vale sat quietly in seat 2A, her back straight, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She was traveling light, no flashy jewelry, no designer suit, just jeans, a deep navy hoodie, and a pair of running shoes that looked well worn but cared for. To the other passengers, she was invisible, another tired traveler heading west. That was exactly how she wanted it. Corbin Slate, the tall, sharp-jawed flight attendant serving first class tonight, clearly saw her differently. Since boarding, his eyes lingered too long, his voice too clipped, his movements toward her seat too abrupt. He had already checked her boarding pass twice. Once at the gate, once again after takeoff, muttering something about fraudulent upgrades. Each time, Serafina met his suspicion with silence and a calm smile. She had learned long ago the value of restraint, but now the restraint of one woman was about to collide with the arrogance of another man. Corbin leaned over, his shadow cutting across her tray. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you again to move to economy. This seat isn't for people like you." His tone was cold, rehearsed, almost casual, as if such cruelty was simply routine. A ripple of discomfort spread across the cabin. A few passengers shifted in their seats, glancing away. Others raised phones slowly, discreetly, cameras glinting under the cabin light. Serafina inhaled, steady and deliberate. Her inner voice whispered, "Do I rise now, or do I let him dig his own grave?" She thought of her grandmother's words, "Strong hinges carry heavy doors." She was the hinge. The door about to swing would be heavy indeed. "I paid for this seat," Serafina replied softly. "I'm not moving." Corbin's jaw tightened. "Don't make this harder on yourself." He reached down, his hand brushing her arm, not gently, but with the roughness of someone asserting dominance. "Do not touch me," she said, her voice low, steady, unyielding. The cabin seemed to freeze. A baby 2 rows back stopped crying. The air itself held still. Then, in one sharp motion, Corbin's open palm cracked across Serafina's cheek. The sound was small, but it carried. A single slap, echoing off the aluminum walls, vibrating against every watching chest. A collective gasp rose, sharp and jagged. One passenger covered her mouth. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Phones lifted higher, lenses focused, red record lights blinking like tiny alarm signals. Serafina did not flinch. Her head turned slightly with the impact, but her posture remained unbroken. She lifted her hand, touched her cheek gently, then let it fall back into her lap. Inside, a storm raged. Memories of boardrooms where she had been underestimated, labs where her designs were questioned, conferences where her presence was doubted until she spoke and silence fell. The slap was not new, it was just louder, more public, more brutal in its clarity. Her mind spun through choices. Rage, humiliation, collapse. No, none of those. Her strength was not in breaking, but in holding. She looked up, her eyes locking on Corbin's. Calm, unshaken, unafraid. "Do you know," she said quietly, "who owns this plane?" A murmur rippled through the passengers. Phones tilted closer, recording her words, capturing her steady face, her measured tone. Corbin blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Serafina allowed the silence to stretch. She wanted every passenger, every recording, every microphone hidden in every phone to feel this pause, to lean into it. Only then did she speak again. "You'll find out soon." Her voice was not a shout. It was not sharp or defensive. It was a whisper that cut deeper than any scream. Jordan Reyes, the senior attendant, appeared in the aisle, eyes wide, panic evident. He had seen many conflicts in cabins before delays, drunks, entitled passengers, but never a crew member striking a passenger. His gaze darted between Corbin's clenched fists and Serafina's calm, upright figure. Jordan's throat tightened. "Do I intervene now and risk my job, or wait and let the system bury her?" His conscience wrestled with his fear. Across the aisle, Clara Jennings, a civil rights attorney, raised her phone high and steady. She was not whispering. "I'm recording everything," she announced. "Every second, for the record." The cabin shifted again. Passengers who had tried to look away now leaned forward. Some began to murmur their agreement. The tide was turning, inch by inch. Serafina felt the eyes on her, the weight of the moment pressing down, but she also felt something else, an old resolve, forged in years of battling invisibility. This was not just about her, it was about every face like hers that had been told they didn't belong. Her heart pounded, but her breathing stayed even. Patience, she told herself. Not yet. Let them reveal themselves fully. Corbin, rattled by the silence and the phones pointed at him, muttered, "This is going to end badly for you." He turned on his heel, storming toward the galley, muttering into his intercom about disruptive passengers. Jordan lingered a moment longer, torn before following. Clara lowered her phone slightly, her eyes locking with Serafina's. She mouthed the words, "I've got you." Serafina nodded once. She sat back in her seat, folding her hands again in her lap, her cheeks still warm, but her spirit unbroken. The hum of the engines filled the silence left behind. Passengers shifted, whispered, but no one looked away from her now. Inside, her mind whispered again, steady as a mantra, not rage, not despair, purpose. This moment will mean something. She closed her eyes for a breath, then opened them again, focused, ready. The flight was long, and justice had only begun to board. The engines roared in her memory, not just tonight's flight, but 1,000 flights before. Serafina Vale had lived her entire life around airports and airfields. Even as a little girl in Georgia, she used to lie in the backyard grass, eyes tilted skyward, watching contrails stretch across blue like ribbons of silver. She used to whisper to herself, "I will build something that touches the sky." Tonight, she was doing just that, but no one around her knew. To them, she was just a woman in comfortable clothes, hoodie zipped up, hair tied back, face bare of makeup, a woman heading west on a late evening flight. There was nothing about her appearance that announced power or wealth. That was deliberate. The decision to keep her identity private was never easy. She had signed the papers 3 years ago that gave her controlling interest in Aurelia Airways, a move that shocked the industry. A black woman, barely past 35, had quietly bought the majority stake in an airline that once dismissed her as an outsider. She had done it without fanfare, without press conferences, without grand speeches. Power, she believed, meant more when it moved silently until the moment it needed to roar. Her grandmother's birthday had been the reason for this trip. 75 years old, still walking strong, still speaking her mind with the clarity of a bell. The party in Atlanta had been a whirlwind of cousins, gospel songs, and warm, sweet potato pie. Before Serafina left, her grandmother clasped her hand tight and whispered, "Strong hinges carry heavy doors. Do not break, child. Be the hinge that holds." The phrase looped in Serafina's mind even now, a steady rhythm against the sting still lingering on her cheek. She remembered boarding at Dallas, transferring from a short regional hop. The gate had been crowded with families heading to Seattle, tech workers on laptops, couples whispering about wine tours in Napa. She had queued quietly, boarding pass in hand, slipping through the first-class lane. The attendant at the podium had glanced at her once, then twice, scanning her ticket a little longer than necessary. "You know this is first class, ma'am," the attendant had said, not unkindly, but with an edge of disbelief. Serafina had smiled gently. "Yes, I know." She had walked down the jet bridge, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the carpet. Inside the cabin she had found seat 2A, stowed her backpack carefully, and sat. Around her, passengers shifted in expensive suits, polished shoes, leather briefcases. She noticed the subtle glances, the flicker of surprise, the quick looks exchanged. She had experienced those looks all her life. Then Corbin Slate had appeared. At first, he seemed efficient, almost brisk, but the way his eyes lingered on her made something inside her tense. He had checked her ticket again, just making sure. "Ma'am." She had nodded, her face serene. Inside, though, her mind whispered, "Here we go." Corbin returned a few minutes later, offering champagne to the man in 2B, a silver-haired executive type with cufflinks that gleamed under the cabin lights. He poured with care, smile wide, then moved on to offer sparkling water to a woman in 2C wearing pearls. When he reached Serafina, he did not offer anything. He simply said, "I'll get to you later." That had been the first cut. Small, sharp, and intentional. Serafina had chosen silence. She unfolded her laptop, reviewing notes on the upcoming systems overhaul Aurelia was preparing. The irony struck her. The very airline whose cabin crew was dismissing her tonight was about to roll out technology she had designed. Technology that would save them millions in efficiency. Technology she had invented in the quiet hours when doubt pressed hardest. Another cut came when Corbin passed her seat again, dropping a hot towel onto her tray without words, the cloth sliding half off before she caught it. The passenger behind her received his towel with a polite, "Here you go." "Sir?" Her fingers tightened around the fabric. A part of her wanted to call him out, to say his name, to name what was happening. Another part urged patience. She thought of the hinges again, carrying weight silently. Jordan Reyes had noticed. She caught his eyes once, just briefly, and saw something flicker there, concern, hesitation. He was older, seasoned, someone who had seen enough cabins to know when things were wrong. But he had not spoken. His silence was another kind of weight pressing on her chest. And then there was Clara Jennings, seated across the aisle. Clara had been reading a thick book on civil rights litigation, underlining passages with a pen. When she saw Corbin snap at Serafina, Clara had raised an eyebrow, then opened her phone. The lens tilted slightly, subtle but purposeful. Serafina saw it, and in that moment felt a flicker of relief. Someone else was watching. Someone else understood. As the flight reached cruising altitude, Serafina leaned her head back against the seat. The cabin dimmed. A soft chime announced meal service. Her cheek no longer burned from the slap, but inside her chest the conflict deepened. Should she have confronted him sooner? Should she have declared who she was? Forced him to see her power before he struck? Or was it better this way, to let the mask of his prejudice drop fully, in front of witnesses and cameras, before revealing the truth? The internal debate gnawed at her. She thought of her grandmother's words again. Hinges, heavy doors. If she spoke too soon, the door might slam shut before anyone else saw. If she waited, the weight of what was happening might be undeniable. She remembered another moment, years earlier, in a boardroom filled with men who doubted her calculations. A senior executive had told her, "We'll have one of the guys check your math." She had said nothing then, too, and waited. When the numbers proved flawless, she had looked at him and said only, "The math checked me." That silence had been louder than any shout. Now, in this cabin, the choice felt the same. Her silence would speak. Her restraint would roar. Around her, the cabin breathed in low murmurs. The man in 2B pretended to scroll through emails but tilted his phone slightly toward her. "Recording!" A woman 2 rows back whispered, "I can't believe he hit her." Serafina sat still, every muscle under control, her eyes steady. The sting on her cheek had faded, but the fire inside her only grew. She felt the weight of the cameras, the eyes, the silence. She felt the door's hinge creak under pressure, ready to swing. When the captain's voice finally came over the intercom, steady but cautious, Serafina opened her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hart. Please remain seated as we address a situation in the cabin." The air thickened again. Serafina straightened. The hinge was about to bear its weight. She was ready. The hum of the engines was steady, a low vibration that ran through the bones of the aircraft. It was the kind of sound frequent travelers learned to ignore, but tonight Serafina Vale heard it differently. Each vibration seemed to echo the tension in her chest. She sat upright in seat 2A, laptop open, a blank document glowing softly in front of her. She had typed 3 words and then stopped. She could not focus on work, not with the weight of eyes around her, not with the memory of Corbin Slate's voice still ringing in her ears. He had checked her boarding pass again, twice in the first half hour. Once when she settled in, and then again after takeoff, approaching with that same narrowed stare, asking her to hand it over as though she might have slipped into a seat that did not belong to her. She remembered the way his fingers had brushed the corner of the paper ticket too long, as if daring it to reveal fraud. When he finally gave it back, his lips pressed into a thin line that said more than words could. She tried to brush it off. She had done this before. Countless flights, countless small reminders that her presence in first class felt like a question mark to others. She always told herself to breathe through it, to save her strength for battles that mattered. But each time it happened, a small part of her wondered why she should have to choose silence at all. The service cart rolled down the aisle, rattling against the carpet. Corbin was at the front, his smile warm as he poured champagne into a crystal flute for the man in 2B. He bent slightly, careful not to spill a drop, his voice smooth. "Enjoy your flight, sir." He moved next to the passenger in 2C, a woman with pearls that caught the cabin light. "Would you like sparkling or still?" he asked with the same graciousness. Then he reached Serafina's seat. No smile, no offer, just a glance at her laptop and a clipped sentence. "I'll get to you later." He pushed the cart on before she could answer. A hush spread across the row. The man in 2B coughed softly, looking away. The woman in 2C shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with the clasp of her necklace. Everyone noticed. No one spoke. Serafina closed her laptop slowly, Her hand lingered on the lid, fingers pressing hard against the metal. She told herself not to react, not yet. Every instinct screamed to call him back, to demand the same respect given freely to others. But she swallowed the words. She remembered her grandmother's voice. Strong hinges carry heavy doors. The cart returned 10 minutes later. This time, Corbin tossed a hot towel onto her tray without meeting her eyes. The cloth slid half off before she caught it. He had said nothing. To the passenger behind her, he had smiled and said, "Here you go, sir. Let me know if you'd like another." Serafina unfolded the towel and pressed it against her palm. The heat should have been comforting, but it felt like an insult, a reminder that even kindness could be weaponized when delivered without care. She placed it back on the tray neatly, across the aisle. Amara Quinn was watching. The civil rights attorney had already tucked away her book and now held her phone in one hand, angled just enough to capture what was happening. She did not hide it. When Serafina's eyes met hers, Amara gave a small nod. "I see this too. I see you." The acknowledgement eased something inside Serafina's chest. She was not alone. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Should she confront Corbin now? Should she say something, demand something, or would that only feed the story he was already weaving, that she was disruptive, difficult, out of place? Her thoughts tumbled over each other. She had spent years mastering the art of restraint. In boardrooms, she had learned to keep her voice measured when others shouted. In negotiations, she had let silence stretch until men twice her age cracked under the pressure. But this was not a boardroom. This was a cabin full of strangers, a stage she had not chosen. The next cut came sharper. Corbin brushed past her shoulder, knocking her elbow into the laptop she had reopened. The cup of water she had placed on the tray spilled onto the keyboard, droplets running across the keys. She gasped and pulled the laptop away, grabbing a napkin from the pocket beside her seat. Corbin looked down, lips curling. "Too many items on your tray," he muttered, almost under his breath. But the tone carried. Passengers nearby heard it. Some shifted again, uncomfortable. Serafina dabbed at her laptop with calm precision. Inside, fire raged. She wanted to look up and meet his eyes with all the fury that pressed against her chest, but she kept her expression steady, her movements careful. She knew every passenger watching could see the difference between her composure and his disdain. Jordan Reyes, the senior attendant, appeared in the aisle just then. His eyes flicked to the wet napkins, the laptop, the smirk on Corbin's face. He lingered, lips parting as though to speak, but then he closed them again. He turned, retreating to the galley. Serafina's heart sank. He had seen. He had chosen silence. His fear was its own prison, and it chained her too. She sat back, pressing her palms against her knees. Her inner voice whispered furiously, "Why am I always the one who has to stay calm? Why am I always the one who must decide if the truth is worth the backlash?" She remembered the countless times she had been told to wait, to prove, to endure. She wondered how many more times the world would ask her to choose patience over dignity. Her eyes closed briefly. She breathed in, breathed out. Patience. The hinge holds. Not yet. When she opened her eyes again, she saw Amara across the aisle, her phone still steady, her gaze fierce. She saw Jordan's shadow in the galley, shoulders hunched. She saw passengers shifting uneasily, whispering to each other. The cabin was awake now. The stage was lit. Corbin returned once more, this time carrying a tray. He placed it carefully before the man in 2B, describing the entree options with detail and charm. He repeated the ritual at 2C. Then he looked at Serafina, his smile gone. "You'll get what's left," he said flatly. A sharp breath escaped from someone 3 rows back. A woman whispered, Did he just say that Serafina's pulse quickened, but her expression remained unchanged? She folded her hands in her lap and looked directly at him. "That will be fine," she said. Her voice was soft but deliberate. She wanted him to hear the control in it, to feel the steadiness he could not shake. She wanted the cabin to see it too. Corbin's nostrils flared. He straightened, adjusted his tie, and walked away. For a long moment, silence filled the space he left behind. The hum of the engines returned to the forefront, a reminder of altitude, of distance from the ground. Serafina exhaled slowly. The cuts had been many, small, deliberate, meant to slice dignity piece by piece, but she had not broken. She had not raised her voice. She had not surrendered her ground. Inside, though, the storm raged louder. How many more cuts would come before the breaking point? How long before patience was no longer strength, but a chain? She thought of her grandmother again. Hinges, doors. She felt the weight pressing harder than ever. She reached for her phone, not to record, but to type a single line in her notes. The line was simple, but it carried everything. Document everything. Do not let this vanish. As she typed, Amara leaned across the aisle slightly and whispered, "You don't have to endure this alone." Serafina turned her head. Their eyes met. She gave the smallest nod. That nod carried a promise. The hinge would hold, but not forever. The engines roared on, steady, as if the sky itself waited for what would come next. The cabin lights dimmed further as the aircraft leveled at cruising altitude. Meal service had just begun. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread floated through the air, mingling with the sterile scent of recirculated oxygen. Passengers shifted in their wide leather seats, unfolding napkins, adjusting trays, whispering conversations that buzzed beneath the constant hum of the engines. Serafina Vale tried to focus on her screen, but the sting of small humiliations clung to her like static. Each incident replayed in her mind, the champagne withheld, the towel tossed, the muttered remarks. The cuts were adding up. She reminded herself to breathe, to sit tall, to hold the weight of the moment without collapsing under it. But she knew the storm was far from over. Corbin's slate returned down the aisle, his stride brisk, jaw tight. In his hand was a clipboard, the kind crew used for compliance checks. He stopped at Serafina's row, glancing down at her laptop again. "Ma'am," he said, voice clipped, "I need you to stow that immediately. Regulations require all electronics to be secured during meal service." Serafina looked around. Across the aisle, a man tapped loudly on his MacBook, a spreadsheet glowing on his screen. 2 rows ahead, another passenger was typing furiously on a tablet with a keyboard case. Not one of them was being asked to put their devices away. She met Corbin's eyes, calm and steady. "I understand regulations," she said, "and I also understand that they apply to everyone. I'll put mine away when the others do." Corbin's jaw tightened. He leaned closer, lowering his voice but sharpening his tone. "Don't play games with me. I said stow it." Before Serafina could respond, Clara Jennings leaned across the aisle. Her phone was in her hand, camera recording, her voice clear. "Excuse me, but I happen to know FAA rules very well. Devices are not required to be put away during meal service at cruising altitude. You're misrepresenting the regulation." Heads turned, passengers perked up, listening. Corbin shot Clara a glare, but she did not flinch. "This isn't about safety," Clara continued, her tone like a gavel striking. "This is about selective enforcement, and I'm documenting every second." Corbin straightened, his face flushing. "Mind your own business." But the damage was done. The cabin had heard, murmurs spread. A man whispered to his wife, "She's right. I've never been told to put my laptop away." Serafina folded her hands over the keyboard, her expression calm. "I'll continue using my laptop. Thank you." Corbin's eyes narrowed, the anger sparking in them unmistakable. He jerked the clipboard against his chest and muttered, "You're being disruptive." He turned as if to walk away, but then pivoted sharply, stepping closer into her space. His hand darted out, grabbing at the edge of the laptop. The sudden movement startled the passengers around them. Gasps rose. Serafina's hand shot out, pressing the lid shut protectively. Her voice was steady, but her tone carried the weight of steel. "Do not touch my property. Do not touch me." Her words hung in the air like a strike of lightning. For a beat, no one moved. Corbin's nostrils flared. He leaned in, his whisper harsh. "People like you always think the rules don't apply. Maybe economy class would remind you where you belong." The words were venom. The passengers nearby froze, their eyes darting between the two. Serafina's heart pounded, her blood rushing hot in her veins, but she kept her posture still, her voice even. "I belong exactly where my ticket says I belong. I'm not moving." The refusal landed heavy. It was not shouted. It was not angry. It was absolute. Corbin's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smirk. He tightened his grip on the laptop for a split second, then released it, shoving the clipboard under his arm. "Fine," he spat, "but this will go in my report." He turned sharply, nearly colliding with Dorian Cade, who had been approaching from the galley. Dorian's eyes darted to Serafina, then to Corbin, then back again. His lips parted, as if he wanted to speak, to acknowledge what he had seen. But then he hesitated. His fear was written across his face. He said nothing. Serafina looked at him, her eyes searching, almost pleading. Say something. Break the silence. But Dorian only swallowed and turned back toward the galley. The ache in her chest grew heavier. Silence again. The silence of complicity. Clara spoke across the aisle, her voice low but fierce. "You handled that perfectly. Don't let him bait you. Everything is on camera." Serafina gave the smallest nod. Gratitude flickered in her eyes. But inside, her mind churned. How many times had she been here before, in some version of this moment? How many times had she been asked to choose between dignity and safety, between protest and composure? Her father had once told her that justice moved like a tide, slow and relentless. But tides needed wind to rise. Was it time to be the wind or to remain the hinge? She glanced around the cabin. Passengers were whispering, their phones raised higher now. The man in 2B looked down at his screen nervously, pretending to scroll. The woman in 2C avoided her eyes, cheeks flushed with discomfort. No one wanted to be involved, but everyone was watching. The air felt thicker, charged. The confrontation had shifted the cabin's center of gravity. Even the engine's steady hum seemed louder now, as if amplifying the tension. Serafina folded her laptop carefully, setting it aside. She sat back, pressing her palms against her thighs, grounding herself. The slap had not yet come, but she could feel the storm gathering. Her inner voice whispered furiously, "You could end this now. You could say who you are, reveal your power, and stop this in its tracks." He would fold the second he knew, but then another voice pushed back. "If you show your hand now, they will say it only mattered because you had power. They will excuse his actions as a mistake, a misunderstanding. They will erase the truth." Patience, she told herself. Let the truth reveal itself fully. Let the mask slip all the way. Corbin returned minutes later, this time carrying meal trays. He served 2B and 2C with exaggerated politeness, describing each dish as if narrating a commercial. Then he placed a tray in front of Serafina without a word. letting it drop hard enough that the silverware clattered against the plate. She did not flinch. She adjusted the fork neatly, placed the napkin on her lap, and began eating with deliberate grace. Her silence roared louder than any protest. The storm was not over. She could feel it building, pressing against the walls of the cabin, demanding release. She would hold until the moment came. And when it did, the door would swing wide, and nothing would be the same. The cabin had settled into a rhythm of clinking cutlery and soft conversation. The tension from earlier lingered in the air like static before a storm. But for a moment it seemed to fade into the background. Passengers ate their meals, sipping wine, scrolling through phones, whispering over folded napkins. The hum of the engines seemed louder now, carrying a steady undertone that matched the rhythm of Serafina Vale's heartbeat. She lifted her fork carefully, tasting the food placed in front of her without comment. The meal was lukewarm, the chicken overcooked, but she chewed slowly, with dignity, as though she had been served the finest dish on earth. She would not let Corbin's slate take even that from her. But Corbin was not finished. His shadow fell across her again as he passed through the aisle. She could feel the energy shift when he neared, the way conversation quieted, the way bodies stilled. He stopped suddenly at her row, glancing down at her with a smirk that carried both challenge and disdain. "You need to finish quickly," he said. "I need this tray cleared. Others are waiting." Serafina raised her eyes, calm and unwavering. "I'll finish when I finish," she replied softly. The passengers nearby stilled again. It was a small defiance, but in the charged atmosphere of the cabin, it felt like a declaration. Corbin leaned down, his voice dropping into a whisper meant only for her. "You don't get to tell me no." Her fork hovered above the plate, inside. Her chest tightened, her breath catching for just a moment. She thought of all the other times she had heard those words, in different places, in different forms. She thought of the countless no's she had swallowed to keep peace, to keep moving forward, but not this time. She set the fork down gently and looked straight at him. "Yes," she said, steady and deliberate. "I do." The words landed like a stone thrown into still water. The ripples spread instantly. Passengers turned their heads, phones tilted higher, recording lenses catching every angle. Corbin's face flushed deep red. He reached forward abruptly, grabbing the edge of the tray with one hand and Serafina's arm with the other. The grip was not subtle. It was forceful, a man asserting control. Gasps erupted around them. A woman 2 rows back cried out, "You can't do that." Serafina's body stiffened, but her voice stayed level. "Remove your hand from me, now." But Corbin did not let go. His voice rose, sharp and cutting. "You're disruptive. You're a problem. If you don't comply, I'll move you myself." And then, before anyone could stop him, his hand came across her cheek in a swift, brutal slap. The sound cracked through the cabin like thunder. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died instantly. The weight of what had happened settled in a stunned silence. Phones caught the moment in crisp, undeniable detail. Clara Jennings, already recording, whispered into her camera. "He just struck her. You're all seeing this." Serafina's head turned slightly with the impact, but her posture remained firm. Her cheeks stung, the heat radiating across her skin. Inside, a war raged between fury and restraint. She wanted to shout, to unleash every ounce of anger building inside her, but she chose differently, slowly, deliberately. She lifted her hand and touched the side of her face. Then she placed her hand back into her lap, her body upright, her expression calm. The silence stretched on until finally she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying across the cabin. "Do you know who I am?" Corbin froze. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, suddenly aware of dozens of eyes locked on him, of cameras pointed in his direction, of the weight of witnesses who had seen everything. "You'll find out soon," Serafina continued, her tone even, her gaze unshaken. The passengers stirred. A man leaned forward, whispering loudly. "I've got this on video. This is going viral the second we land." Another woman murmured, "Unbelievable. He actually hit her." Corbin straightened, his chest heaving, trying to regain control. "You're making a scene," he snapped, though his voice cracked under the pressure. "I'll have the captain deal with you." He stormed down the aisle toward the galley, muttering into his intercom. Jordan Reyes appeared seconds later, his face pale, his movements hesitant. He looked at Serafina, then at the passengers around her. His lips trembled as he spoke. "Is everything all right here?" The cabin erupted in overlapping voices. "He hit her. We all saw it. This is abuse." "I have it on video." Jordan raised his hands, trying to calm the uproar. His gaze met Serafina's again. She could see the conflict tearing inside him. He wanted to intervene, but fear held him back. He whispered, I'll talk to the captain." Then he turned quickly and retreated. Clara leaned across the aisle, her voice steady and fierce. "You don't have to say a word. The truth is already here. Everyone knows what happened." Serafina gave a small nod. Inside, her heart pounded. Her inner voice fought against itself. One part screamed to reveal her power now, to end this, to show them exactly who they had just struck. But another part urged patience again. Wait, let the truth ripen. Let it become undeniable. She sat back in her seat, hands folded in her lap, her cheek still burning. She looked around the cabin, meeting the eyes of the passengers one by one. Some looked away in shame, others held her gaze, silent solidarity written across their faces. Inside, the storm raged, but she held her ground. She thought again of her grandmother's words. Strong hinges carry heavy doors. Tonight, she was carrying a door so heavy it shook the walls of the cabin itself. The aircraft hummed onward, slicing through the night sky. But inside, the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer just a flight from Miami to San Francisco. It was a courtroom at 30,000 feet. Serafina closed her eyes briefly, inhaling, exhaling. She whispered to herself, so quietly no one else could hear, not rage, not despair, purpose. When she opened her eyes again, her gaze was steady, her spirit unbroken. The battle had only begun. The cabin was no longer calm. A slap had fractured the silence, and the aftermath lingered like smoke after fire. Murmurs rippled through the first-class cabin, low but urgent, each voice carrying the disbelief of what they had witnessed. Some passengers still sat frozen, hands clasped tight, while others leaned into the aisle with their phones angled toward the galley where Corbin Slate had disappeared. Serafina Vale sat in seat 2A, her posture unshaken though her cheek still carried the heat of his hand. She folded her hands in her lap, steady, almost statuesque. She knew the eyes on her were searching for a reaction, for anger, for a breakdown. She gave them none of it. The intercom crackled. "Captain Hart to the forward cabin. Please, Captain Hart." The announcement was sharp, sterile, but its meaning carried weight. The chain of command was being pulled into the open. Jordan Reyes appeared first, his steps quick, his face pale. He avoided Serafina's gaze, choosing instead to glance at the floor as he passed. Fear wrapped around him like a shroud. He stopped at the galley door, whispering into the interphone before disappearing behind the curtain. Moments later, the curtain swayed open and Captain Celine Hart emerged. She was tall, silver hair pulled tight into a bun, her Navy uniform crisp. She carried herself with the authority of years in the cockpit, a presence that usually calmed passengers. Tonight? Her expression was heavy, caught between command and caution. She walked directly to Serafina's row. "Good evening, ma'am," she said, her tone polite but clipped. "I understand there's been a disturbance." The word landed like an insult. Disturbance, as though the slap had been noise, not violence. Before Serafina could answer, Corbin slid out from the galley, clipboard in hand, his voice rising quickly. "Captain, this passenger has been non-compliant since boarding." She refused repeated safety instructions. She argued about stowing her devices, and she created a hostile environment for the crew. I had no choice but to intervene. A chorus of voices erupted instantly. "That's a lie. We all saw what happened. He hit her." Phones lifted higher, screens glowing, capturing every word. Clara Jennings stood halfway from her seat, her voice clear. "Captain, I am an attorney. I have the entire incident recorded. He slapped her. In front of witnesses." Captain Hart raised her hand, her face tightening. "Please, one at a time." She turned back to Corbin. "Is that true?" Corbin's lips pressed thin. She became aggressive. "I was defending myself." Gasps spread. A man 3 rows back barked, "That's not what happened. You're lying." Serafina sat still, breathing evenly. Her mind ticked through options like calculations on a page. If she spoke now, if she raised her voice, Corbin would twist it into further proof of disruption. If she revealed who she was, the narrative would shift. But the truth of what had happened might be buried beneath power. She needed clarity, undeniable and unshakable. Calmly, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. With deliberate precision, she opened her voice memo app, pressed record, and set it on the tray. The small red circle glowed like an ember. She looked up at Captain Hart and spoke clearly, every word sharp and measured. "For the record," she said, "my name is Serafina Vale. I am a paying passenger in seat 2A. I have been compliant with all safety regulations. The flight attendant you see here, Mr. Corbin Slate, struck me across the face in front of witnesses. Multiple passengers are recording video. I am documenting this for evidence." The cabin fell silent again. Her voice carried no anger, no hysteria, only truth. It cut through the noise like glass. Captain Hart's face stiffened. She looked at Corbin, then at the passengers holding up their phones. She knew. The evidence was everywhere. Yet her role demanded control, demanded order. "Ms. Vale," she said cautiously, "I assure you we will investigate this when we land. For now, I need to ensure the flight continues safely." Serafina tilted her head slightly, eyes steady. "Safety begins with truth, Captain." A murmur of agreement spread. Clara's voice rose above it. "You can't sweep this under the rug. We all saw what happened. The recordings are already uploading." Corbin shifted uneasily, his smirk fading. He clutched the clipboard tighter, his eyes darting to the phones. For the first time that night, doubt cracked through his armor. Jordan appeared again, hovering at the edge of the aisle, his voice low. "Captain, we're at 35,000 feet. Diversion is possible if necessary." Captain Hart hesitated. Diverting meant paperwork, scrutiny, headlines. Proceeding meant risk, exposure, passengers turning against her crew. She stood caught between convenience and justice. Serafina watched her, calm but unyielding. Inside, her thoughts clashed violently. Part of her longed to end this with one sentence, to declare her ownership, to wield power like a hammer. But another part whispered patience. Let them choose their path. Let them reveal who they are under pressure. That truth would last longer than any revelation she gave now. She inhaled, slow and steady, and looked around the cabin. I am not disruptive. I am not moving. I am not unsafe. I am a passenger asking for dignity. That is all." Applause broke out softly at first, a scattered few claps, then stronger, spreading through the rows. It was not loud, but it was enough to shift the balance. Passengers were no longer silent observers. They were choosing sides. Corbin's face reddened further. "You're encouraging a mutiny," he hissed. Clara snapped back instantly. "No, she's encouraging accountability." Captain Hart exhaled, her jaw tight. "We will continue to Seattle," she said finally. "Mr. Slate, you are to remain away from Seat 2A unless absolutely necessary. Jordan, you will handle this section." Corbin started to protest, but her sharp glance silenced him. The curtain swayed as Captain Hart returned to the cockpit, her shoulders rigid. Jordan remained, his expression conflicted, but gentler now. He looked at Serafina, opened his mouth, then closed it again. Words failed him, but the guilt in his eyes was clear. Serafina picked up her phone, stopped the recording, and saved it with a title. Evidence Flight 719. Her heartbeat slowed, her cheek still burned. Her mind was a storm, but she had done what she needed to do. She had chosen patience, chosen purpose. The fight was not finished. It had only shifted into its next phase. She leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. Around her, passengers whispered, cameras still angled. She could feel the tide turning, the current moving in her direction. Inside, her inner voice whispered again, not rage, not despair. Purpose. Hold the hinge. Let the door swing open. And somewhere deep within, beneath the pain and humiliation, a calm certainty grew. When they landed in Seattle, the reckoning would begin. The curtain closed behind Captain Celine Hart, and for the first time since the slap, the cabin grew quiet. It was not peace, but a fragile silence, thick with unease. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering in low voices. The glow of phone screens still raised like lanterns in a storm. Serafina Vale sat motionless in Seat 2A. Her cheek still throbbed faintly, though the heat was fading into a dull ache. She placed her fingertips against her skin briefly, then dropped her hand back into her lap. She would not let anyone mistake the gesture for weakness. She looked forward, eyes fixed on the seat back ahead. Outwardly calm, inwardly raging. Her thoughts twisted like wires pulled too tight. She asked herself again and again, should I reveal it now? Should I tell them the truth, that this plane, this airline, this very company is mine? The temptation was sharp. One word could flip the entire narrative, but patience anchored her. She needed the system itself to expose its own rot. The man in 2B finally broke the silence. He leaned closer, speaking in a hushed tone. "Miss, I just want to say I'm sorry you had to go through that. I didn't say anything earlier. I should have." His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his cufflinks. "I thought staying out of it would keep things calm, but it only made me part of the problem." Serafina turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. She studied him for a moment before answering. "Silence always takes sides," she said quietly, "but it's not too late to choose differently." The man nodded, his face flushing, guilt washing over him. Across the aisle, Clara Jennings spoke up more firmly. Her phone was still recording, angled high. "I'll make sure this footage goes to the right people. They won't bury this. Not this time." Others chimed in. A woman 2 rows back leaned into the aisle. "I've been flying for 20 years. I've never seen anything like that. I'll testify if needed." The murmurs of agreement grew louder. The atmosphere shifted again. Solidarity forming where there had once been only discomfort. Passengers were no longer looking away. They were leaning in. Serafina felt the tide turning, and yet inside her chest the storm did not ease. She thought of her grandmother, of the birthday party in Atlanta, of the way her grandmother's hand had squeezed hers so tight. Strong hinges carry heavy doors. She carried that door now, but the weight pressed harder with each passing minute. Her phone buzzed softly on the tray. A notification appeared. Limited in-flight Wi-Fi struggled to load, but one message pushed through from her chief of staff, Elena Morris. It was short. Urgent. We've been contacted. Passenger footage already hitting social. CEO Magnus Rowe aware. Do you want me to escalate? Serafina's chest tightened. The ripple had already begun. She typed back one line. Careful and deliberate. Document everything. Wait until landing. She hit send, then set the phone down again. A calm mask returned to her face, but inside, she felt the gravity of what was coming. The storm was leaving the cabin and spreading into the world beyond. Jordan Reyes reappeared, his steps slower now. He carried a bottle of water and set it gently on Serafina's tray. His eyes flicked to her cheek, then back to the floor. His lips parted as though he wanted to apologize, but fear sealed them again. He simply nodded once, then moved away. She watched him go, her heart tightening. Fear was a cruel silencer, and yet she knew the cost of breaking it. She wondered how many people in her life had chosen silence over truth, and how many had later regretted it. The hours stretched long. The cabin dimmed further, lights glowing soft amber. Passengers shifted into recline, some pretending to sleep, others whispering still. But Serafina did not close her eyes. She stared forward, replaying every moment, calculating every next step. Her thoughts wandered back through her past. She remembered being 15, sitting in a guidance counselor's office, told that aerospace engineering was too ambitious for a girl like her. She remembered being 22, presenting her first patent application, only to have her ideas questioned until a male colleague repeated them word for word. She remembered every door that had been slammed, every hand that had pushed her back. And she remembered each time she had held steady, each time she had waited, each time patience had turned into undeniable proof. The slap tonight was not new. It was only louder, more public, impossible to deny. And because it was public, it had the power to shake more than just her. It had the power to shake the system itself. The curtain rustled again. Corbin Slate passed through, his face tight, his eyes darting to the phones that still pointed his way. He avoided Serafina's gaze, but his shoulders bristled with unspent rage. She felt his presence like static electricity, a dangerous charge waiting for release. Amara Quinn finally spoke from across the aisle, her tone calm but firm. Ms. Vale, if you'd like, I can represent you. I'm an attorney specializing in civil rights. You don't have to face this alone. Serafina's eyes softened slightly, a flicker of gratitude breaking through her steel. Thank you, she said simply. Amara nodded once, her phone still steady. We'll make sure the truth holds. Serafina sat back, closing her eyes briefly. The plane hummed onward through the dark sky, but the silence inside her mind grew louder. She wrestled with the choice before her. Reveal now, or wait power now, or patience. Each path carried weight, each demanded sacrifice. But one thing was certain. When the wheels touched down, there would be no turning back. She opened her eyes again, her gaze sharp, her spirit steady. She whispered to herself, the mantra that had carried her through boardrooms, through conferences, through battles no one else had seen. Not rage, not despair, purpose. The long silence stretched on, but beneath it, a reckoning gathered momentum. The cabin was dim, hushed, the kind of hush that wasn't restful but heavy. Passengers shifted uneasily, some pretending to watch movies, others whispering into phones or scribbling notes on napkins. But everyone carried the same thought: they had seen something they could not unsee. Serafina Vale sat in 2A, her posture unwavering, her face calm, though her cheek still carried a faint mark. She pressed the tips of her fingers against her thighs, grounding herself with each steady breath. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, as if the aircraft itself was amplifying the tension. She pulled her phone from the tray again. The Wi-Fi connection was weak, dropping in and out, but enough to let through a trickle of messages. Dozens of notifications buzzed across the screen, mentions, tags, links. Passenger footage was already online, clips spreading across social platforms in real time. Words like slapped and first class appeared in flashing headlines. The story was escaping the cabin, spilling into the wider world. Serafina scrolled once, then stopped. She could not afford distraction. Not yet. She set the phone down and leaned back, closing her eyes. The darkness behind her eyelids pulled her into memory. She saw herself at 26, standing in a crowded boardroom at Aerodyne Systems, clutching a stack of blueprints. The men around the table had laughed when she introduced her design for a low-cost turbine efficiency model. "It's clever," one had said, "but maybe let the engineering team refine it." She had been the engineering team. She remembered the silence she chose then, the way she let the data speak when the prototype saved the company millions. She saw herself at 31, in a sleek office overlooking downtown Atlanta, pitching investors for her own aviation startup. Some nodded politely, others checked their watches, but one leaned back and said, "You don't look like the kind of person who builds airlines." She had smiled then, serene, and answered, "Maybe you don't look like the kind of person who invests in them." Her startup was funded within weeks. Now, at 36, she sat in first class on a jet she owned in truth, if not in name, and still, the disbelief followed her, sharpened now into violence. The slap was not just one man's act. It was the echo of every doubt, every dismissal, every silence. She opened her eyes. The cabin was still dim, but she felt stronger, more certain. This moment would not break her. It would define her. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, in a glass tower in downtown San Francisco, Magnus Rowe sat at a long conference table surrounded by screens. The CEO of Aurelia Airways had been pulled from a dinner with investors and now faced a flurry of reports. His communications director, Eliza Grant, slid a tablet toward him. "The footage is already viral. Multiple angles. A passenger reports your crew struck a woman in first class." Magnus pinched the bridge of his nose. "Damage control," Eliza hesitated. "It's spreading too fast. Hashtags are trending." "Your first-class assault?" E-Flight 719. "And there's another, Yash." She stayed calm. People are already turning her composure into a rallying cry. Magnus leaned back, his chair creaking. "Who is she?" "We're still verifying," Eliza said. "The manifest lists her as Serafina Vale. Quiet profile. No immediate flags." Magnus froze at the name. His eyes narrowed, the calculation flashing across his face. He knew that name. He knew the contracts, the holdings, the quiet stake that had shifted hands months ago. He whispered, almost to himself, "Oh, God, that's her." Eliza frowned. "You know her." Magnus's voice was low, steady, almost grim. "She's not just a passenger. She owns us." The room stilled. Screens flickered with looping clips of the slap, but all eyes turned to Magnus. "What do we do?" Eliza asked. Magnus exhaled slowly. "We wait. She'll reveal herself when she chooses, and when she does, every second of how we respond will decide if Aurelia Airways survives this." Back on the plane, Serafina felt the gravity of what was unfolding beyond the cabin, though she could not see it. She glanced across the aisle at Amara Quinn, whose phone was still recording, still streaming. Their eyes met again. Amara gave a small, resolute nod. "You're stronger than he knows," Amara whispered. Serafina smiled faintly. "Strength isn't the question. Timing is." The minutes stretched into hours as Flight 719 cut through the night sky. Some passengers drifted into uneasy sleep, but the cabin never fully rested. Whispers, glances, phones glowing in the dark. The slap had bound them all into a single, unspoken narrative, and they knew the landing would not be ordinary. Serafina sat still, the storm within her now a tide of clarity. She thought again of her grandmother, of the words spoken on her 75th birthday. Strong hinges carry heavy doors. The hinge was holding, but the door was about to swing wide. She touched her phone once more, typed a single line into her notes, and saved it. When power hides, truth reveals. The engines roared steadily outside, carrying them closer to a reckoning that none aboard could yet imagine. The hours had passed slowly, each minute weighed down by the memory of the slap and the silence that followed. Now, at 30 minutes before landing, the announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into San Francisco. Please ensure your seats are upright and tray tables stowed." The cabin stirred awake. Passengers stretched, gathered headphones, folded blankets. But the air was not routine. Every movement carried tension. Every whisper circled back to the moment burned into all their minds. The slap, the calm, the waiting storm. Serafina Vale remained still in seat 2A, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Outwardly composed, inwardly bracing. She had carried the weight for hours, and soon she would have to decide whether to keep hiding or step into the light fully. The hum of the engine softened as the plane began its descent, but inside her chest, her pulse quickened. Corbin Slate returned down the aisle, his face set in a mask of control. Though the tightness around his eyes betrayed him, he held a stack of compliance cards, walking seat by seat, pretending to check for safety. He lingered at 2A longer than necessary, his voice low, almost taunting. "Remember what I said," he muttered. "I'll be filing a full report. Non-compliance, hostility, aggression. You won't be welcome back with Aurelia again." The audacity struck passengers around her like a spark in dry grass. Murmurs rose instantly. "Unbelievable. He's doubling down." We all saw what happened. Phones lifted again. Amara Quinn's voice cut through, firm and unwavering. "Mr. Slate, I've documented your conduct from the start of this flight. Your version of events will not survive evidence. I suggest you stop adding to your mistakes." Corbin shot her a glare, but Amara didn't flinch. Her phone stayed steady, her eyes locked on his. Serafina turned her head slightly, her gaze finding Corbin's. Her voice was calm, low, but strong enough to be heard clearly. "You've already written your report," she said. "But the truth has already written its own." For the first time, Corbin's mask cracked, his lips parted, then closed, his chest rising in a shallow breath. He turned abruptly and moved down the aisle, but the damage was done. The passengers had seen his final attempt at control for what it was, desperation. The cabin buzzed louder now, passengers whispering openly, some speaking in full voices. A man in row 3 leaned into the aisle. "You stood tall through all of it. That strength I'll never forget." A woman behind him added, "You didn't just hold your ground, you gave us all courage." Serafina inclined her head gently, accepting the words without vanity. Inside, though, she felt the pressure building higher. She thought again of the choice before her, to to reveal or not, to end this as just another story of mistreatment, or to show them the larger truth that she was not simply a passenger, but the owner of the plane beneath their feet. The nose of the aircraft tilted downward slightly, engines humming at a different pitch. The captain's voice returned over the speakers. "Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for arrival." Jordan Reyes appeared again, his movements subdued, his face pale. He checked seat belts, adjusted trays, his eyes avoiding Serafina's until the very last moment. When he finally looked at her, his lips trembled. In a whisper barely audible, he said, "I'm sorry." Then he moved on quickly, the words hanging in the air like a fragile offering. Serafina absorbed them quietly. It was too little, too late, but it was something. Fear had held him silent, but remorse had forced a crack. She wondered if he would carry that weight long after this flight. She shifted her gaze to the window. The faint lights of San Francisco glimmered below, scattered across the dark canvas like stars fallen to earth. The city drew closer, each mile bringing her closer to a decision she could no longer postpone. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Elena, her chief of staff. Media already outside SFO. Magnus in crisis mode. "They don't know you're on board. Do you want me to confirm Serafina read the message twice, then lock the screen?" Her answer would come soon enough. Not in a text, but in a moment the entire cabin and perhaps the world would witness. She sat taller, rolling her shoulders back, centering her breath. She closed her eyes for a brief second, whispering the words she had carried through every battle of her life. Not rage, not despair, purpose. The landing gear thudded out beneath the aircraft, the sound reverberating through the cabin. Passengers buckled belts tighter, braced themselves for the jolt of touchdown. But Serafina braced for more than the landing. She braced for revelation. As the plane descended lower, the chatter in the cabin grew bolder. A teenager whispered to her mother, "She's going to say something. I know it." Another passenger muttered, "Whoever she is, she doesn't deserve this. Someone has to answer for it." Clara leaned across the aisle once more, her voice quiet but carrying conviction. "When we land, don't hold back. The world is already listening." Serafina met her eyes and gave the smallest nod. The lights of the runway appeared, bright white lines stretching across the dark. The engines roared louder, the plane shuddering slightly as it descended. The cabin held its collective breath, the weight of anticipation pressing down like gravity itself. The wheels struck the ground with a thunderous jolt, rubber burning against asphalt. The plane rattled, then steadied, engines reversing power as it slowed. Gasps and exhales filled the cabin, but the tension did not ease. Everyone knew the landing was only the beginning. Serafina sat in 2A, hands folded, eyes forward. She felt the hinge inside her holding steady, the heavy door poised to swing open. The moment was near. When the aircraft slowed to taxi, she whispered again under her breath, words only she could hear. "Now comes the truth." The plane rolled to a stop at the gate, engines humming low as the seatbelt sign flickered off. But no one moved. First class sat frozen, every passenger gripping their belongings, yet staying rooted, as though the cabin itself was holding its breath. The anticipation was too thick, the tension too sharp. Through the small window, flashing blue and red lights reflected against the glass. Police vehicles were already on the tarmac, their sirens silenced, but their presence undeniable. Beyond them, the terminal windows glowed with the shimmer of cameras. Reporters had gathered, lenses pointed toward the jet bridge. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Law enforcement will be boarding the aircraft shortly." A collective murmur swept through the cabin. Some passengers gasped, others whispered, "They're here for her." "No, they're here for him. We'll see." Phones lifted again, ready to capture history. Corbin Slate stood near the galley, clipboard in hand, face pale but posture rigid. He was clinging to his story, to his authority. His eyes darted nervously between Serafina Vale and the curtain that separated them from the outside world. Jordan Reyes hovered near the jump seat, his fingers twitching. He looked like a man caught between conscience and fear. Knowing silence would no longer save him. Serafina sat still in 2A. She placed her hands neatly on the armrests, her spine straight, her eyes calm. Her heartbeat quickened, but her breathing remained measured. She had carried the weight of patience across the sky. Now, on the ground, the moment she had prepared for all her life was finally here. The door opened with a hiss. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, followed by a station manager in a Navy suit and an airline security officer. Behind them trailed a woman with a clipboard and headset, the kind used for operations and crisis management. The station manager spoke first, his voice projecting authority. "We've received a report of a disruptive passenger in first class. We need to identify the individual involved." Corbin moved quickly, pointing toward Serafina with a flourish of relief, as if salvation had finally arrived. "It's her," he declared. "Seat 2A. She was hostile, refused safety instructions, and assaulted me." Gasps erupted instantly. The cabin buzzed with disbelief. A man in row 3 barked, "That's a lie." Clara Jennings raised her phone higher. "I have the footage right here. He hit her. We all saw it." The officers hesitated, their eyes shifting between Serafina, calm and composed in her seat, and the chorus of passengers contradicting the flight attendant. Amara Quinn rose slightly from her seat, her voice clear and professional. "My name is Amara Quinn. I am an attorney licensed in 3 states. I have multiple recordings of this incident. As do half the passengers here, the disruptive individual is not the woman in 2A. The disruptive individual is your employee, Mr. Slate." Corbin's face blanched. "They're exaggerating," he sputtered. "They're biased." "Biased," Clara cut in sharply. "Against the truth every second is on camera. Check the timestamps." The security officer stepped forward, his expression hardening. He extended a hand toward Clara. "Ma'am, please provide that footage." Clara handed over her phone, unlocked, already cued to the moment of the slap. The officer watched, his jaw tightening. He replayed it twice, the sound of Corbin's hand striking Serafina echoing faintly through the cabin. Then he looked up. "This is assault." The cabin erupted in murmurs of agreement. Phones were held higher, passengers nodding, speaking up. "We saw it. She stayed calm the whole time." "He's the liar." Corbin's voice rose, desperate now. "You can't just believe them." But before he could finish, Serafina finally moved. She stood slowly, gracefully, her presence commanding without a word. She held her phone in one hand, her calm expression radiating authority. She looked directly at the officers, then at the station manager. "My name is Dr. Serafina Vale," she said, her voice steady but carrying across the cabin. "I am not just a passenger, I am the majority shareholder of Aurelia Airways. I own the plane you are standing on." The words landed like thunder. Gasps spread, sharp and undeniable. Corbin's mouth dropped open, his face drained of color. The station manager froze, blinking as though he had misheard. Passengers leaned forward, whispering, exclaiming, "She owns the airline, oh my God!" No wonder she stayed calm. Serafina continued, her tone calm but unyielding. "Your employee struck me in front of witnesses, then attempted to weaponize false reports against me. This is not just misconduct. It is criminal behavior, and it ends tonight." Silence filled the cabin again, the weight of her revelation pressing into every corner. The officers exchanged glances, then moved toward Corbin. "Mr. Slate, you are being detained for assault pending investigation. Please place your clipboard down and step forward. Corbin shook his head wildly, panic flooding his face. No, this isn't right. You don't understand. But the officer took his arm firmly. The clipboard clattered to the floor. Gasps turned into applause, scattered at first, then spreading through the cabin. Serafina did not clap. She simply stood tall, her eyes fixed forward, her face resolute. The hinge had held. The door had swung open. The station manager cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly. "Dr. Vale, I had no idea you were aboard. Please allow us to." She cut him off, her tone sharp but composed. "You had every idea, not of my name, but of my dignity." That should have been enough. The word struck deeper than the revelation itself. Passengers nodded, murmurs of agreement spreading again. Amara Quinn rose fully now, her voice strong. "Dr. Vale, would you like me to accompany you during the debrief? I will ensure no detail is erased." Serafina inclined her head gently. "Yes, thank you." The officers escorted Corbin down the aisle, his shoulders slumped, his protests weak and broken. Cameras followed his every step, passengers capturing his downfall in high definition. As he disappeared through the cabin door, Serafina returned to her seat briefly, lowering herself with grace. The weight in her chest eased slightly. The truth was no longer hers alone to hold. It belonged to everyone who had seen it. Outside, the flashing lights still glowed against the night. The reckoning had begun, and she knew it would not stop at the gate. It would ripple into boardrooms, into headlines, into history itself. She folded her hands once more, her face calm. Not rage, not despair. Purpose. The storm was far from over, but she had just turned the tide. The air inside the jet bridge was thick with whispers and flashing lights from the terminal beyond. Passengers shuffled slowly, clutching their carry-ons, drawn toward the glow of cameras like moths to a flame. Every step felt like entering a stage. "Doctor." Serafina Vale walked at the center of the group, her stride measured, her face calm. She carried no baggage in her hands, only dignity in her bearing. Amara Quinn kept close beside her, phone still in hand, ready to record if needed. At the far end of the jet bridge, the terminal erupted with noise. Dozens of reporters pressed forward, microphones raised, screens flashed as cameras clicked. The story had already leaked from social media into national news. They weren't waiting for confirmation anymore. They were waiting for her. "Is it true you were assaulted on board? Did the flight attendant strike you? Are you really the owner of Aurelia Airways?" Questions volleyed through the air, sharp and unrelenting. Serafina paused just beyond the door, letting the voices crash against her like waves against a cliff. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at the crowd, her presence commanding silence without a word. Then she stepped forward. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, carrying over the noise. "I was struck. I endured humiliation and false accusations. But what happened tonight is not just about me. It is about every passenger who has been silenced, dismissed, or demeaned because someone thought their dignity could be ignored." The terminal hushed. Even the clicking cameras seemed to soften. Behind her, passengers who had witnessed the slap began to nod, some raising their phones to show reporters the recordings. Clara Jennings lifted her voice. "We saw it. Every word she's speaking is the truth. And I'll testify to it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd of passengers. One by one, they leaned forward, offering confirmation. The narrative was no longer controlled by a single person. It had become a chorus. Then, from the crowd of reporters, a new figure pushed forward. Magnus Rowe, CEO of Aurelia Airways, emerged in a tailored suit, flanked by aides. His expression was polished, but sweat beaded faintly at his temple. He extended a hand toward Serafina, his voice carefully measured. "Dr. Vale," he said, "on behalf of Aurelia Airways, I want to apologize deeply for what you experienced. We will take swift action. Please, let's step into a private room to discuss this further." But Serafina didn't take his hand. She looked at it briefly, then raised her eyes to meet his. "There will be no private discussions," she said, her tone sharp yet composed. "This incident did not happen in secret. It happened in public, before witnesses, and its resolution will be just as public." Gasps rippled through the reporters, cameras tilted closer, microphones extended higher. Magnus's smile faltered. He cleared his throat. "Of course." But Serafina cut him off gently but firmly. "No but. Tonight revealed the cracks in Aurelia's culture, not one man's hand alone, but the silence that enabled it. I will not let this airline bury it under polished statements. From this moment forward, Aurelia Airways will be accountable." Magnus's aides shifted uncomfortably, whispering in his ear, but he raised a hand to silence them. His eyes narrowed slightly, the practiced confidence of a corporate leader straining against the reality of being outmatched. Reporters surged closer, questions overlapping. "Dr. Vale, what actions will you demand? Will there be firings? Will there be reforms?" Serafina held up her hand, and the noise stilled again. She looked directly into the cameras. "Tomorrow morning, I will convene Aurelia's board of directors. We will launch an independent audit of every discrimination complaint, past and present. We will establish a passenger advocacy office that reports directly to the board, not to management. We will create mandatory training and transparent reporting for every employee, with consequences for failure." Her voice grew stronger, each word measured like the strike of a gavel. "And we will compensate passengers who have been harmed, not with empty apologies, but with concrete action and financial redress. Tonight is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of accountability." Applause broke out in the terminal, scattered at first, then swelling. Some passengers clapped, some reporters joined, even bystanders who had gathered at nearby gates added their hands to the sound. Magnus forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed the weight pressing on him. He nodded stiffly. "We will support your vision, Dr. Vale." Serafina turned slightly toward the passengers who had stood by her. Her expression softened. "You gave me courage by refusing to stay silent. Tonight, the truth belongs to all of us. Hold me accountable as well. Hold us all accountable. That is how change begins." The terminal erupted again, not with chaos, but with energy and electricity that felt larger than one flight, larger than one airline. The cameras captured every second, every word, sending it out into the world where millions would soon watch. As the crowd surged with renewed questions, Serafina leaned closer to Amara Quinn. "We've opened the door," she whispered. Amara smiled faintly. "Now comes the walk through it." Serafina straightened again, facing the storm of cameras with unshakable calm. She knew this was only the start. Tonight had pulled the curtain back. Tomorrow would demand rebuilding the stage itself. The next morning, the skyline of San Francisco shimmered in pale gold light as the city stirred awake. Inside the top floor of Aurelia Airways headquarters, however, no one moved with ease. The boardroom was packed, the air tense, executives whispering over coffee cups that had gone cold. Screens glowed with headlines repeating the same story across every major outlet first-class passenger slapped revealed as airline owner. At the head of the table sat Magnus Rowe, shoulders stiff, His usually polished demeanor cracked under the weight of the storm. Around him, board members shifted in their seats, papers rustling, their faces pale with the knowledge that this was no ordinary crisis. Then the glass doors opened. Dr. Serafina Vale entered. She wore a simple navy suit, her hair swept neatly back, her expression calm but unyielding. Every eye followed her as she crossed the room and took her place at the opposite end of the table. She carried no binder, no notes, only the steady authority of someone who no longer needed proof. Magnus cleared his throat. Dr. Vale, thank you for coming on such short notice. Serafina raised a hand and he stopped. Silence fell instantly. She scanned the faces around the table, letting the pause settle like stone. I will not waste time, she said. Her voice was measured, each word deliberate. What happened on Flight 719 is already reshaping the public's perception of this airline, but perception is only the surface. The deeper truth is that a culture has been allowed to fester, one where arrogance, bias, and silence thrive unchecked. That ends today. Murmurs rippled down the table. One board member, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. Dr. Vale, surely you understand incidents like this can be managed quietly. We've weathered storms before. Perhaps we consider a suspension, a retraining program, a carefully worded statement. Serafina's eyes cut to him, calm but sharp enough to silence. Do you think the world is asking for silence dressed in apologies? Do you think passengers who watched one of your employees strike a woman across the face will be soothed by polished language? No. The world is asking for accountability. And I will not settle for less. Magnus shifted uncomfortably. And what exactly? Do you propose? Serafina folded her hands on the table. First, the termination of Corbin's slate, effective immediately, with referral of all evidence to law enforcement. Second, the suspension of every supervisor who enabled misconduct last night, pending review. Third, a full independent audit of discrimination complaints across the last 10 years, conducted by an outside firm, with results made public. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. One woman spoke cautiously. That would expose us to litigation. That, Serafina replied, would expose the truth. Litigation will come either way. The only choice you have is whether you face it with integrity or with denial. The room quieted again. She continued, her voice steady but growing stronger. Fourth, the creation of a passenger advocacy office reporting directly to this board. Fifth, the establishment of a mandatory bias and de-escalation training program designed not as a checkbox but as a measurable standard tied to employee evaluations and promotions. And finally, a compensation fund for passengers harmed by discriminatory practices, overseen by a third party to ensure fairness. Silence. The weight of her list hung in the air. Then she leaned forward, her tone dropping slightly. If this board refuses, I will use my controlling stake to replace leadership until it is done. Do not mistake me for a figurehead. I did not build my life by waiting for permission. Magnus's jaw tightened. He looked around the table, searching for support, but saw only lowered eyes. The momentum had shifted entirely. He exhaled slowly, then nodded. The board accepts your conditions. Serafina's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained resolute. Good. Because this is not just about Aurelia. What we set here will ripple across the entire industry. We will lead, or we will be left behind. And I intend for us to lead. A younger board member leaned in, his voice almost reverent. Dr. Vale, what do you call this new direction? She paused, considering, then answered, the Dignity Protocol. Because dignity is not a luxury, not an upgrade. It is the baseline. From this moment on, Aurelia Airways will be known not just for where it flies, but for how it treats every soul on board. The words settled into the room, not as rhetoric, but as law. Heads nodded slowly, the gravity of the moment sinking in. Later that afternoon, Serafina stood before a sea of cameras once more, this time at Aurelia headquarters. Passengers from Flight 719 stood behind her, including Clara Jennings and Amara Quinn, their presence a testament that truth had been witnessed and would not be silenced. She addressed the world with the same calm power that had carried her through the night. What happened to me was not an isolated act. It was a symptom of a system that too often looks away. But last night, passengers refused to look away. And because of them, we will begin again. She outlined the reforms, the audits, the advocacy office, the training, and the compensation fund. She named them not as promises, but as commitments already in motion. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed, and social media exploded with every sentence. When she finished, applause thundered not only from the crowd in front of her, but from around the world, where millions watched live streams of the moment. That evening, alone in her apartment overlooking the bay, Serafina finally let herself breathe deeply.